What is up, guys? Random Item here with your Week 2 Fantasy LCS video. I'm going to be doing all of my predictions for Week 2 for both NA and EU LCS. And just as a disclaimer, I am on business travel this week, so I have not had as much time to prepare this video as I normally would. So I am trying to give you guys the best video I can, but I have had a lot less time to make this video, so my predictions might be a little bit worse than they normally are. I will be making it up to you guys next week for Week 3. Will be unveiling kind of a new way of doing my fantasy points, and I will be breaking things down into much more detail for you guys who like that. And then additionally, I apologize if the audio or the visual quality is a little bit worse. I am on my laptop, with my backup microphone because I'm on travel. So bear with me for Week 2. I will have a much better video in Week 3 for you guys. All right, so let's talk about the EU strategy for Week 2. We've got Unicorns of Love, Misfits, Vitality, Giants, Rockhead, and Origin, who are all playing 2 matches this week. I will be talking about who on those teams I think you should pick up. And then additionally, you need to be looking at Splice and Fnatic. Splice and Fnatic have 2 matches in Weeks 3 and Weeks 5. So people are going to start picking up those Splice and Fnatic players at the end of Week 2. So if you've got room on your bench right now, you should be picking up those Splice and Fnatic players before Week 2 ends. For nomenclature, if the win-loss is in white, that means I think it's going to be a normal game. If it's in red, I think it's going to be a stomp, which means less fantasy points usually for both the winning and the losing team, but especially the losing team will suffer a lot. And if the win-loss is in blue, that means I think it's going to be close, which usually means a lot more fantasy points for both teams, but especially the winner. The winner will get a ton of fantasy points if they win those really close matches. Okay, so let's talk about S-tier teams. We got Cloud9, TSM, Phoenix One, and FlyQuest. So FlyQuest is definitely the surprise on this list right now on S-tier. They had a fantastic Week 1, and their Week 2 looks really good for them, which kind of keeps them in that S-tier range. They did perform like at an S-tier level in Week 1, so I have them still at S-tier for Week 2. So first up, Cloud9. Everybody on Cloud9 is playing well. Contracts performed the best out of everyone on Cloud9 in Week 1. But pretty much anyone you have on Cloud9 you should start because they're going to have a very good week this week. Same can be said for TSM. They're all playing well. They will all have a good week too. So if you get any TSM players, you should play them. And then also the same can be said for Phoenix One. They're all playing well. They're going to have a good week. If you've got any Phoenix One players, you should play them. On FlyQuest, the person who really stands out on FlyQuest is High. He's the shot caller. He's playing phenomenal. He looks like he's a really, really strong mid laner. If you've got him, definitely start him. The rest of FlyQuest is playing decent. They're not putting up as good fantasy points as High is. Balls put up some pretty good fantasy points in Week 1, but I'm still not convinced that he's that top tier, top laner that we're that he could be possibly, and definitely I think his history is kind of hurting him. Balls was always known as kind of a weaker top laner. I think he's definitely improved since his last time on C9, but I'm not completely sold on him yet. But if you have him, he's definitely a good starter for Week 2. I think that FlyQuest overall is going to have a very good Week 2. Moving on to the A-tier teams, we've got Immortals, Dignitas, and Vitality. Immortals has been playing very well in Week 1. The person who's performing the best on Immortals is definitely Cody's son. He's definitely the person you should start if you've got him. But Immortals will have a strong Week 2, so there's nobody on that team that's performing really badly. Dignitas is my next A-tier team, and I think that Dignitas is an incredibly strong team, definitely a top 4 team in the NA, but as far as the fantasy points are concerned, they did not put up very good fantasy points in Week 1, so I am putting a disclaimer on Dignitas. They didn't put up good fantasy points in Week 1, and I'm keeping an eye on them, and if they don't put up good fantasy points in Week 2, then obviously they're going to be dropping down, but they are a really strong team. They're a really good team, so I'm expecting that their fantasy points will be higher this week than they were in Week 1. And then my last team that I've got on A tier is Vitality. And a lot of people are going to say, why is Vitality higher than Unicorns of Love? And the reason why I think Vitality is going to get slightly more fantasy points than Unicorns of Love this week is that their games are going to go longer than Unicorns of Love. I think the Vitality matches are going to be much closer. They're going to go a lot longer, and that's going to allow them to get more fantasy points. Unicorns of Love is the team that's right below them. And like I said, the reason why they're lower than Vitality is I think that their matches are going to be a lot shorter, which is going to wind up reducing the number of fantasy points that Unicorns of Love is going to get this week. That said, they're still going to be a decent B-tier team, so you can definitely start them if you don't have anyone who's better in those different positions. My next B-tier team is Misfits. Kind of a similar story to Unicorns of Love. I think they're going to struggle a lot against G2. They should get decent fantasy points against Rockhat, but G2 is definitely a hard matchup for them this week. And then my final team in the B tier is Team Liquid. I don't think they're going to win either of their matches this week against TSM or Phoenix One, but I think that both of those matches are going to be very close. I think they're going to be able to get decent fantasy points, even though it's going to be a loss. In week 1, the people who really stood out on Team Liquid were Lorlo and Matt, actually. I thought it was going to be Rainover and Piglet, but it was actually Lorlo and Matt who, compared to their peers on other teams, they got the highest amount of fantasy points. Both Lorlo and Matt were S tier in week 1 in their respective positions. Moving on to the C tier, we've got Giants, Rockhat, Echo Fox, Envy, and CLG. So Giants and Rockhat are playing against each other, so I think that's going to be a very close match. I give a slight edge to Giants in that matchup. But the problem is that I think that both Giants and Rockhat are going to struggle against their other opponent, Fnatic or Misfits, respectively. Echo Fox is another one of those teams that they're actually playing better than I thought they were going to, but they've got kind of a difficult week 2. They're going against Dignitas and FlyQuest. On Echo Fox, the person who really stood out is actually their rookie jungler, Acadian. He played phenomenal in week 1. He was just fantastic. And then Froggen was, trying his hardest to carry his team in week 1, and he played very well as well. So definitely those two players could be starters for your team this week. They definitely are kind of standing out as kind of the carries for Echo Fox right now. For Envy definitely does not look like a very strong team. That could definitely be because they had a substitute jungler in week 1. They might be a bit stronger as the week goes on, but they're going up against Phoenix One and Immortals this week, which I think is going to be a difficult week 2 for them. The people who really stood out on Envy was the bot lane. Their bot lane was fantastic. So if you've got the Envy bot lane, you should play both the AD carry and support. Probably in the flex role, I would say. But yeah, Envy is one of those teams that's struggling. So you might want to hold off from them. They might improve once they get their jungler back, but for right now, it's kind of questionable. And the last team I've got in C tier is CLG, and CLG actually put up really good fantasy points. But they don't look very strong. I think the only reason why they put up good fantasy points is they had really long games in week 1, and I don't think you can really rely on that week in and week out. I think that this week they're going to struggle a little bit. They're going up against FlyQuest and Cloud9. They could get some decent fantasy points if they're able to extend those matches, but I definitely think it's a very high risk, which is why I had them in C tier. But just keep in mind, they could have an S tier week again this week. I know like Stixay and Huhi had phenomenal week 1s, and Aframu as well. All 3 of those players were like S tier in week 1, but that was only because the games went on for like 50 minutes. So they could have that in week 2, but it's very, very high risk, and I think it's much more likely that they're not going to get as many fantasy points in week 2. And then rounding out the D tier, I've got Origin, H2K, G2, Fnatic, and Splice. Origin is not as bad as I thought they were going to be. They are much better than I thought they were going to be. However, I still think they're near the bottom of the list when it comes to the EU teams. They're going up against Unicorns of Love and Vitality. I think they're going to lose both of those matches, which is going to give them not that many fantasy points. And then H2K, G2, Fnatic, and Splice, all good teams. However, they're only playing 1 match this week, which puts them at the bottom. So anyway, that is my full analysis for week 2. I'm sorry that this video is much shorter, and I'm not going into as much depth as I normally would this week. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. I will answer all of your guys' questions. I will I'm really sorry about this week that I didn't have as much time as I wanted, but I will answer all of your guys' questions. So leave a comment and I'll help you guys out for week 2. And then week 3, I'll have a much better video, a much more detailed video. So I hope you all have a fantastic day. This is Randomonium signing off.